We're going to open this Snickers here. We're going to see a problem. You see these veins on the top? I do not touch Snickers bars with veins. Ever since I've been a born-again Christian, I tried them veins side up, veins on the tongue, and it just doesn't work. So, I came up with this 3D printed Snickers deveiner. Let me push down a little. Yeah, look at that. Beautiful. For those of you who have problems with Snickers veins, no more. Look at that. A perfectly deveined Snickers.
Anti-LGBTQ plus hysteria has become so ridiculous in this country that I bet it's genuinely hard for you, pun intended, to tell whether or not that person is trolling. Because on one hand, maybe a fundamentalist Christian who is fighting same-sex attraction does find some sort of comfort in deveining all of his Snickers bars. Maybe he also chops up bananas and other dick-shaped food items before eating them to avoid the urge to deep-throat them, because we all know that's exactly what gay people do. So it wouldn't be that much of a stretch if he's that hypersensitive to feel compelled to devein Snickers bars before eating them. But if he is trolling, I mean, it wouldn't be the first time lefty shitposters use the Snickers dick vein to troll conservatives. Back in 2022, Snopes had to address a viral rumor started by Juniper about Snickers caving to the woke mob by removing the dick vein, which was humor spawned from Fox News outrage over the green M&M being desexualized. And in case you don't remember what I'm talking about, Tucker Carlson unironically complained about how the company caved to the woke mob by making the green M&M less sexy. So it's funny to see the Snickers dick vein meme repurposed for the new era, where the mere sight of a queer person makes any conservative apoplectic. And if I had to guess, I think that he probably is trolling, because the same guy who posted that also posted 3D printed plant waterers that look exactly like butt plugs. So I think he's probably trolling, if I had to guess, but the fact that it's so hard to tell is a testament to the environment that we're in. I say this because this Fox News clip could easily also be considered a parody itself if you didn't know any better.
It's National Fudge Day for the VP, but I thought it would be too gay. So I did pickle cake instead. I'm not sure if I got it right.
Pickle
Thank
cake.
you for being here, Mr. Vice President, and enjoy your pickle cake.
Thank you guys
All
for
right, that's it for us, everyone. Have a great night.
Sexy hippos and pickle cake.
So that's where we're at in 2026, where fudge is apparently too gay, because a common insult against gay men is that they're fudge packers because they have butt sex. Unlike straight people, of course, who would never engage in such degeneracy. But since homophobes call gay people fudge packers, it logically follows that it is also gay to eat fudge, because maybe he thinks it's akin to eating ass. I honestly don't know if I can follow the logic there, but I know some of you might assume that he was joking and it's wrong to take him serious, but I think you don't understand Jesse Waters. He really is that hyper aware of any and everything that could be perceived as homosexual. I present you with Exhibit B.
Joe Biden used a straw. Now, if you've seen me on The Five or on Prime Time, you know I recommend that all men refrain from using straws. It's unbecoming. The way a man's lips purse, the size of the straw is just too dainty, the way your fingers clasp on it. No, come on. Straws are for women and little kids.
Yeah. And need I remind you how in last December, so-called manosphere influencers, the alphaist of the alpha, like Andrew Tate, they were conversing with Nick Fuentes openly about how gay it was to be with women, literally, because I guess that if you're too loving of the woman you're attracted to, it might come off as feminine and thus gay. And to conservatives, being gay is inherently icky, of course, and you should do everything you can to let people know how grossed out you are by homosexuality on a regular basis, so that way nobody suspects that you're a homo yourself. Because in their minds, obsessing over what is and isn't gay actually makes them less suspicious somehow. And on that note, the Texas GOP shared a fairly innocuous Get Out the Vote video last month with Scott Pressler, a GOP influencer, and the chair of the state Republican Party in Texas, Abraham George. And as you watch this, I just want you to try to think through reasons why conservatives might be offended by this video.
The chairman is here in person at a polling location in Collin County. This is Allen, Texas. And I have been here since 9:30. It's now 2 o'clock. shaking every hand and meeting voters, and it's been a steady stream, which shows me that people know about today, the runoff.
Ding, 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 you guessed correctly. That video was too gay and too non-white for Republican Party voters. Right-wingers responded saying, this is fucking nauseating. This is the Texas GOP, a man born and raised in India and a gay guy who doesn't know how to wear boots. This video encapsulates how compromised the GOP is. Actual South Park episode at this point. An Indian and homosexual are telling people who to vote for? If this is the Republican Party, I want exactly nothing to do with it. Sodomites and Indians telling you to vote for Israel. Perfect picture of the modern GOP, Lamau. And the most tone-deaf political party award goes to the Texas GOP. Deport that guy immediately. And I shit you not, that was the overwhelming sentiment. They didn't even want to see a gay guy and a non-white guy, even though they were encouraging people to vote for the anti-gay white supremacist candidates that they prefer. And it really speaks to the heightened level of sensitivity towards queer people and really anyone who deviates from the cis white Christian norm. So conservatives really are as ridiculous as the Snickers Devainer guy, which is why most people who saw that video weren't even questioning whether or not it was satirical, because conservatives really are indistinguishable from satire at this point. It is impossible to parody a political movement that is too ridiculous to parody. Yet, actors like Rainn Wilson, who played Dwight Schrute in The Office, pulled a Jerry Seinfeld recently by arguing that political correctness has run amok, and he said this in 2026 during Pride, mind you, but let's hear him out.
I do feel like you couldn't make The Office today. I think that would be too hard to be as politically incorrect as the show was.
Hey, Dwight, wakey, wakey, you ignorant slut. We're no longer in the anti-SJW era of the 2010s. The fascists have taken over the fucking country. I'm not sure if you noticed, and our entire culture has recalibrated to protect their white Christian nationalist sensibilities. Very few companies even changed their logos to rainbows during Pride Month because it's now politically incorrect to showcase anything colloquially referred to as woke, i.e. the existence of queer people and black people, or God forbid, queer black people. And as Yashar Ali put it in a 2023 tweet, Laverne Cox made history in 2014 when she became the first out trans person to be a Time magazine cover subject. It's depressing to realize that if this cover were published today, it would be much more controversial than it was nearly a decade ago. Exactly, because progressive values like empathy and acceptance and anti-racism are now politically incorrect. Dylan Mulvaney got months of harassment and death threats all because Bud Light chose to put her face on a promotional beer can. Gamers just shit their pants last week and threw hissy fits after learning that the new God of War game is going to star a female protagonist. If you are still whining about how the woke mob won't let you tell edgy jokes in 2026, you're just a fucking idiot or out of touch. Netflix just gave MAGA comedian Tony Hinchcliffe a comedy special where he told racist jokes where the punchline was basically that non-white people are weird because they're not white. And at the roast of Kevin Hart, the so-called comedians were being explicitly anti-black because the culture has now fully aligned with the fascist status quo that's taken over the country. So for a comedian to still whine about not being able to tell jokes in 2026 because of the PC police, I just have to ask, what the fuck are you smoking? What jokes can't you tell in Trump's America that he wants to tell specifically? I mean, sure, there are limits. You can't joke about Christians or conservatives without triggering the anti-woke mob, but whether he realizes this or not, Rainn Wilson has already aligned himself with the predominant culture by pretending like everyone else is too sensitive, because deep down I think he knows that if he did call out the real snowflakes, the anti-SJWs, the fascists, the racists, well then he would find himself in hot water. That's how you get canceled in 2026. Saying racism is bad is now the cancelable offense. And it's hilarious for him, of all people, to say that when shows that are more edgy, far more edgy, like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, those are still on till this day. And listen, I love The Office personally. I've watched it from start to finish probably 5 or 6 times, but it's by no means an edgy show. I actually enjoy it because of how wholesome it can be at times. Sure, they do make jokes about race, but it's always at the expense of the main character, Michael Scott, who makes his subordinates cringe by his tone-deaf and downright idiotic comments about race. You could even argue that The Office is woke. If it were published today, it would be considered woke, because the main characters who try to be edgy, they're always the butt of the joke. They look stupid. So it's woke in that sense. Not to mention, The Office is kind of being made today. It's called The Paper. And they're telling the same kind of jokes that they were telling on The Office. I'm pretty sure it has the same writers, or most of the same writers. But as out of touch as he is for saying that dumb shit, I think that Rainn Wilson embodies what is probably the default position for most American normies. That the overly sensitive SJW freaks are ruining everything because they won't shut the fuck up about the things that offend them. The problem, however, is that the snowflakes that he's bemoaning have almost no cultural cachet in Trump's America, and they certainly don't have any fucking political power. The official response from the White House for Pride Month was basically, fuck you to queer people. The brief period where we pretended to accept queer people is over. We're done projecting rainbow lights at the White House during Pride. The only colors you're going to see during Pride are red, white, and blue, baby. And listen, it's not like the rainbow lights were going to liberate queer people, but fascists won't even offer queer people a kind gesture or basic recognition because they fundamentally don't think they should exist. And this cultural shift may seem fleeting and insignificant, but one thing conservatives learned that the rest of society hasn't yet is the political importance of culture. Culture is necessary to give society the push it needs to make sweeping political changes. In the 2010s, when public opinion rapidly shifted on gay marriage, the laws quickly followed suit. But in the 2020s, now that the culture has changed in the opposite direction, the laws once again are realigning to reach parity with culture. The culture now just so happens to be fascist. And even though it's entertaining to poke fun at the snowflakery and hypersensitivity of social conservatives, their vociferousness is meaningful because the government has responded in a manner that is proportional to their outrage. And the worst part is nobody really even seems to notice. For example, journalist Aaron Reed shared one of the most startling reports I've ever read about how the Trump regime proposed a sweeping new rule across 42 different government agencies that requires discrimination against trans and non-binary people as part of a broader fascist effort to erase them from existence. She explains, last week, the Trump administration quietly released a sweeping new federal rule that would use funding threats to force institutions across the country to reject transgender people. The 400-page proposed regulation would codify the administration's anti-trans executive orders into binding federal policy, imposing a blanket prohibition on federal funds going towards gender ideology with terms broad enough to encompass any acknowledgement that gender identity differs from sex assigned at birth or that transgender people even exist. If finalized, the rule would reach every hospital, university, school district, state government, nonprofit, and homeless shelter that receives federal funding, effectively requiring much of American institutional life to discriminate against transgender people as a condition of receiving federal money. And unlike an executive order, the rule would require significant work by a future administration to reverse. She continues, the prohibition is vast. The rule bars federal awards from being used to fund, promote, encourage, subsidize, or facilitate gender ideology. And as mentioned before, because the screening evaluates the recipient as a whole, even indirect support could trigger enforcement. Since the rule was published, Aaron in the Morning has been contacted by those worried about its impact on homeless shelters, which could be required to turn away transgender people. Any acknowledgement of a resident's gender identity could be grounds for a funding investigation. Colleges and universities, among the largest recipients of federal grants in the country, would face renewed federal pressure to enact bathroom bans, sports bans, and restrictions on name and gender marker changes. Any institutional process that recognizes a gender identity different from sex assigned at birth could be deemed gender ideology. Nonprofits and federally qualified health centers could be forced to stop acknowledging that transgender people exist entirely or serving their needs, a step some organizations briefly took during the chaos of the initial executive orders before pulling back when courts and advocates signaled they lacked enforceability. This rule is designed to give them enforceability. So this is truly a five-alarm fire. The federal government is proposing blatantly unconstitutional policy changes that turn an entire group of people into second-class citizens. The damage that this would cause to an entire generation of trans and non-binary people would be incalculable. The government is basically threatening to socially erase trans people and doing so by punishing everybody who dares to acknowledge their existence. And things have gotten so bad in this country that the Lemkin Institute sounded the alarm back in March about how the United States is in the early stages of a trans genocide, with one of the warning signs being a denial of their identity. And nobody's really talking about these things because the denial of trans identity has become normalized again and is being reinforced through social media and cultural institutions that want to stay in the good graces of the Trump regime. And now that conservatives are driving culture, they are legitimizing the erasure of trans people to shore up support for the policies that they're implementing, or to encourage complacency at a minimum. Now, with that being said, I do think that the pendulum is already starting to swing back in the opposite direction, but I mean, the impact Trump's regime is having on culture is still palpable. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're not ever going to see trans representation in TV shows, but TV networks might be a little bit more cautious about certain queer-related topics. Maybe they won't renew shows with prominent trans characters, in part because they know what's coming down the pipeline. LGBTQ plus interest groups are currently fighting the FCC to stop them from doing a policy change that would discourage trans representation in TV shows. It might also mean that social media websites like Meta limit prohibitions on hate speech towards trans people to appease the federal government. And it even means that politicians who are theoretically supposed to be on the side of trans people might cave to anti-trans pressure in order to avoid scrutiny from the fascist regime in power. And I've talked about how angry I am before about Democrats who are throwing trans people under the bus, Pete Buttigieg, Kamala Harris, and others, but it's not just centrists, to be clear. Even though Zoran Mamdani is meeting the expectations of most leftists, trans people are wondering whether or not he's going to fulfill his promises to them. Because as journalist Aaron Reed also reports, a new clinic that'll offer much-needed gender-affirming healthcare in New York City has one conspicuous exception. Aaron writes, Mayor Zoran Mamdani's new clinic will deny care to anyone under 19 years of age, adopting the exact age cutoff from Trump's anti-trans executive orders. She adds, when Zoran Mamdani ran for mayor, he promised to fight back, showing up to protests outside NYU Langone, pledging $65 million for gender-affirming care, and vowing to use every lever of city power to protect trans New Yorkers from federal intimidation. Since taking office, those promises have largely gone unfulfilled. No enforcement action against the hospitals that shuttered their programs, no fines from the Commission on Human Rights despite complaints open for over a year, and no public accounting of the promised funding. Now, in Mamdani's defense, he's only been mayor for half a year, so he could still very well deliver on some of those promises to the trans community, but the fact that his clinic is denying gender-affirming healthcare to trans youth is quite the tell. There's not many options for gender-affirming healthcare, even in New York City, so this is going to be a lifesaver for a lot of trans and non-binary people in New York. The problem, of course, is that this life-saving, medically necessary healthcare is being denied to trans youth, the most marginalized of our entire population. Now, I think we all know why he did this. It's easier to go along to get along. It's better to have gender-affirming care for some trans people than none of them. But these little exceptions that we make here and there, they still matter. And it shows you why culture is so important, because cultural pressure creates political pressure that forces all of society into compliance, including leftists like Zoran Mamdani. And I get that it might seem like I'm one of those nitpicky leftists who's never going to be satisfied, but you have to understand that in a fascist society, every single capitulation counts. Every time we obey in advance, the fascists acquire more cultural power over us. And we shouldn't abandon trans youth, the most vulnerable population in the country, to appease fascists, ever. And for clarification, when we talk about gender-affirming healthcare for trans youth, we're not talking about surgeries for trans kids. We're talking about mental health care that could aid trans youth and their family in a social transition, and eventually prescriptions for puberty blockers. Those are allowed for cis kids, but not for trans kids, which is interesting. And it really tells you what this is about. They just don't like trans people. Even though trans youth exist, their existence has become politicized. And we all feed into that when we bow to the pressure of these fascist tyrants. And to go back to Laverne Cox, who I brought up earlier, she just released her memoir where she talks about her experience growing up trans. And much like cis kids, she knew what her gender was right away. But she was bullied, she was otherized by adults, and at the age of 11, I want to say, she tried to take her own life. And I just want to read you a passage from her book where she talks about the difficulty in being a trans kid. Now, she went in her mother's pill cabinet and she took a bunch of pills and she survived, thankfully. But I want to just read her feelings as a child when she realized she was still alive. Because this right here, it speaks to the experience that trans kids deal with, the pain that they have to endure. I woke up. I was in shock. I'm still here. I felt so numb. I felt no relief to still be living. The pain of being alive in my body and circumstances had not abated. A paragraph later, she says, I really had wanted to die. I really had wanted it to be over. I still did. Was there no way for me to get out? Leaving my body in fantasy and fugue states was no longer enough. I needed to get out. I needed to be free of this. And just to remind you, these were the thoughts that she had as an 11-year-old. And these are the thoughts a lot of trans and non-binary youth have. I mean, this is common for all queer youth, myself included. I never made a suicide attempt, but it's common for trans youth, especially because of how difficult it is to be trans and not being able to be yourself, right? And this right here is precisely why we should never, ever, ever make exceptions for gender affirming care for them, because it is quite literally life-saving. And if gender affirming care were an option for Laverne when she was a kid, odds are she wouldn't have felt that way. And listen, I would highly encourage you to read her book. It's amazing. I think she gives cis people a really good look at how hard it is to grow up queer. And for queer people, she offers the ultimate it gets better message, not just because she's rich and famous, but because she finally learned how to love herself and accept herself after decades of trying. But in conclusion, we should absolutely make fun of right-wing snowflakes for being weird little freaks. But keep in mind that their hypersensitivity, and more importantly, the way society kowtows to them, is a sign of cultural power that is going to have political ramifications. We're seeing that right now. And the only way to shift the Overton window back in our direction is to be as relentless and unapologetic as they are.
Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Play stupid games,
F around and
win
find
stupid
out.
prizes. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes.
Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Play stupid game. Pride. Trans rights are human rights. It is necessary to push trans on the kids. Pride.